me press the record button. I forget. All right, so today we are very privileged to have Dr. Anthony Loke to facilitate this class with us. Dr. Anthony Loke is no stranger to us. He's done a few classes for us in the past. He is an expert in the Old Testament. When me and Pastor Jeremy were in STM, he was our lecturer then. All our Old Testament class, he teaches one night. We have learned so much from him. Also made me love the Old Testament. Now I myself personally prefer reading the Old Testament compared to the New Testament. But yeah, let's welcome him. Today he'll be leading us on introduction to minor prophets, mainly focusing on the book of Nahum. So yeah, let's pass the time to Dr. Taylor, or he is known to us also as Rabbi. So pass the time up to you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Pastor Yu Yong, for the introduction. Yu Yong, one of my good students. Okay, I'm glad that he has picked up a bit more Old Testament now. So I've been asked to do a one-session seminar on Nahum. And so I've entitled it as Nahum, Living in the Shadow of Empire. This whole area of studies, which today we call empire criticism, is something that's now slowly picking up. And people realize that, well, the Old Testament, most of the prophets ministered in a time in the shadow of huge empires. Isaiah, in a time of Assyria, and then Jeremiah, Ezekiel in the shadow of Babylon, and then the post-exilic prophets in the shadow of Persia. And so God's people have always lived in the shadow of empire. So it's not something new, just that we never focus so much on it. So what does a prophet like Nahum have to tell us about? Well, what do we do when we live in the shadow of empire? When there's a big brother who oppresses and subjugates and try to control, and how do we pray? How do we ask God? Okay, so Assyria was you can say the first world empire. There was an old Assyrian empire back in the 2000 BC period, and that's where you have the famous name of Hammurabi. But this is the Neo-Assyrian Empire. It regained its importance around the year 912, and it lasted almost 300 years. And you can see where Judah is. Judah is here. And at the crossroads of what we call the land bridge between Africa, Asia, and of course Europe. And it was a place where nations passed by and trembled over it. So Judah would have to face the power of Assyria for 300 years. Okay. So we want to look at, in this short time that we have, just 6 short areas. One, who is this prophet, Nahum? When did he minister? What is the book like? Because the book has about 3 chapters. So we look at the structure of the book. And then from there, we can see there are 5 blocks of material. And we can then derive his message from those 5 blocks. And where is the book of Nahum found in the Old Testament? Well, it's among the minor prophets. And we're going to see its position. It's the 7th of the 12 minor prophets. And finally end with some application lessons. What can we learn from a book like Nahum? And some lessons which I think are still applicable even today in our time. So we begin with the name Nahum. The name is not found elsewhere in the Old Testament. So imagine from Genesis all the way to Malachi, we don't have any other person named Nahum except this name in the book that's called after him. Nahum is a Hebrew word from NHM, and it means comfort or compassion. So it can be used then from the noun to a verb, and the verb will be to comfort. And you find that Nehemiah's name comes from the same root word, NHM, Nehemiah, which means God is comfort. So it's a name which is comfort. But the message of Nahum will not bring comfort to the hearers, to those who hear his message, because Nahum is only comfort to God's people, the people of Judah, but not to Nineveh, the target of his preaching. What do we know about the prophet? Well, very little, in fact, almost zero. Compared with other Old Testament prophets, very often the prophetic books gives you the name of the father and the reign of the kings which they minister. Nahum is a book which does not contain any of this biographical information. So nothing is really known about the prophet. All we're told is perhaps his hometown. And he's called Nahum of El-Kosh. Just like I, Anthony, and I come from the small little town called Kampa. So Anthony of Kampa. Okay, so El-Kosh is, well, where is El-Kosh? Unfortunately, we really do not know, because if you look at any of the maps that people have drawn about ancient Israel and Judah, we have no idea. There have been three solutions, to this whole idea. The first one is the most intriguing, because this one comes from a medieval tradition. That means it's not ancient, not from biblical times, but in medieval tradition, some people believe that Nahum actually was an exile or a descendant of the exiles from the northern kingdom of Israel, and had been so-called carried off by the Assyrians back to the home, back to the so-called capital of Assyria, that was Nineveh. And so, you remember, northern kingdom of Israel fell in 722. And so some people think that his parents were exiled and he was born in exile. And El-Kosh was a little village just opposite. They think it was a little bit opposite the capital city. And so he grows up looking at the city across the river on the Tigris. And eventually he will preach to the city about its downfall. Now, this medieval tradition persisted because today, you'll be surprised to find actually the tomb of Nahum is not back in Israel. It is in Iraq. Okay, it is in Iraq because of this tradition. So that's the first thing. Some people say no, El-Kosh could have been in Northern Galilee, so that would be a second clue. And some others think that no, El-Kosh is from southern Judah. That means he was a Judahite and he is not an Northerner. So we have three options which we have no further idea. The only other mention of this name is found in the New Testament. People always talk about Capernaum. It's a very bad anglicized version of the Hebrew, because in Hebrew is Cafe Nahum, and Cafe means a village. So the village of Nahum. Now, whether this Nahum is the prophet Nahum, that's why people argue Northern Galilee, at the coast of the Sea of Galilee, we have no idea. Who is this Nahum? Is the village named after him? And today, when you visit Israel and you visit Capernaum, which was the headquarters of Jesus for 3 years, that will be the same name, Nahum. I said that in English, we lost out the H. So be Capernaum. Okay. So we know really zero almost about him, except he was from El-Kosh. And as you say, when did he minister? Again, there's no dating in the title of the book. Whereas most of the prophetic books will give you an idea. The vision of Isaiah in the day, some mention of the reigns of Israel and Judah kings. But Nahum is the one in the prophetic books, minor prophets, which doesn't have any dating. So we really find it hard to date. But we can glean two historical details in the book. Okay. There are two historical details in the book which will give us some idea. First is the mention of the fall and the destruction and the sacking of an Egyptian town or city called Thebes. Thebes was the capital city of Egypt at that time, located up in the river now, I think at the fourth cataract. And it talks about are you better than Thebes that sat by the Nile with water around her? Talking about, the Assyrian sacking. We know one of the Assyrian kings by the name of Ashurbanipal sacked Thebes in the year 633. So that gives us one dating. So when Nahum refers to Thebes, he's talking about the time when you guys whack her and destroy her. And then the book assumes that one day Nineveh will fall. And historically, we know Nineveh fell in 612 BC. The Assyrian Empire will last 3 more years until 609. And then in 609, Haran also fell. The Assyrians were very smart. They didn't have just one, then the whole thing goes. No, they have actually a few capital cities. So by 609, then Haran fell, and then that would be the end of the empire. Nineveh fell in 612 to two persons. One was the Mid-Cyaxares, and one was the king of Babylon, Nabopolassar, the father of Nebuchadnezzar. And they gang up together, the Medes and the Babylonians, and they conquered Nineveh in 612. The Medes didn't want to rule, so they passed it over to Nabopolassar. And so Nabopolassar began to become the king, and from there he will grow his Babylonian kingdom to become the next empire. And so it took over Assyria. So we have two dates, 612, the fall of Nineveh. So take these 2 dates together, and you can see that perhaps the book is written in between this time. Because this has to happen, because if not, Nahum will not be able to talk about Thebes. But the fall of Thebes was something that probably shook the ancient world. How can the capital city of Egypt fall to the Assyrians who come so far away, almost more than 2,000 miles away, and they ransack the city? And then, of course, this was a fall of Nineveh, and what the book is basically focusing on. So we think that the ministry of Nahum definitely occurred between these 2 dates. Apart from that, we cannot date it with any more precision. Somewhere between 663 and 612. Okay. If you were to glance at the book, this is a very detailed split out, but we will only focus later on the major blocks. But if you were to swing through and glance something like this, you can see that this book is actually one whole oracle against a foreign nation. We often use the acronym OAN, Oracles Against Nation, okay, as a short form. This is an OAN. That means the whole preaching is focused against one foreign nation. And we find that the Old Testament prophets often have this preaching on other nations: Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, Phoenicia, Edom, Moab, Tyre. One by one, they will single out those nations. So this whole book, 3 chapters, is just focused on one single nation. It doesn't talk about other nations like Edom, Moab, whatever. Just focus on one, and that is, of course, Assyria. So the whole book is an OAN. And if you were to look at the book from a more, well, not so detailed, we will see that there are actually 5 blocks of material. Apart from the title, there are basically 5 blocks. You can divide the blocks of material into this way. And from there, we can then swing through and look at the message of the book. So that's what I will do. I will use these 5 blocks and then swing you through, and you get some idea of what the message of Nahum is. So let's look at the title first. Because in the title, we get a bit of clues about what's going on. The title is often called a title or superscription, and this is usually added in by the editors of the book. When the people began to collect all these words of Nahum and write it down in a book, the editors usually would then put a title in front, like all the other books: an article concerning Nineveh, the book of the vision of Nahum of El-Kosh. So that is the title that we find. And today we will call this verse 1. We will count it usually as verse 1. So what does it mean? Well, let's take apart some of the words that you can see here. Okay, so there are some of these things here which will probably help us understand. First, this whole 3 chapters is called an oracle. So if you watch the movie, the trilogy Matrix, you realize that Oracle was a woman, a lady, who told this Oracle to Neo. Oracle is a word in Hebrew which means masa, and is a word which we translate as burden. Okay. Originally, it's a word which means a burden, and because it comes to the prophet and he grabs it, he grapple with it, and it weighs him down because it's not an easy message, it's a hard message, and eventually people use it to refer to a message of doom. So when you hear an oracle or masa concerning a nation, it is often a message of judgment. Okay. Usually they will single out some of the bad things the nation has done and how God will now bring judgment upon that nation. So whenever you see the word oracle, it often implies not a good message, okay, because it's something that is heavy and weighs you down. And the target of this oracle, of course, is Nineveh. The name appears here in the title, but Nineveh will not be named until chapter 2, verse 8. It will talk about a city. It will talk about this empire. It will talk about this nation. But it doesn't mention who, like chapter 1, verse 6. Who can stand before his nation? Who can endure the heat of his anger about God and all this? And then God will make a full end to his adversaries and pursue his enemies. Who is this enemy that God will pursue? It doesn't really say until we wait till we come to 2:8. And then finally the name comes out. And then we are told the target is Nineveh, one of the capital cities of the Assyrian Empire. In fact, they had 4 capital cities, Haran, Nineveh, and 2 others. And the nation started in 912 and became only strong in the time of 713 under one of the great kings of Tiglath-Pileser III. So it was a nation empire that lasted 300 years, which is quite a long period of time. But at the height of his empire, the peak of his power was in this period. And this was a period where it will subjugate the northern kingdom of Israel, and it will also force Judah to pay tribute and as well. So Nineveh is the target of this book. And this Nineveh, of course, is also the focus of another book in the Minor Prophets, and that, of course, is the book of Jonah, who ministered about 100 years earlier. Okay, so he had gone to Nineveh to preach judgment, and the city repented, and God allowed the city then to stay on in their power. But you can see, obviously, by the time Nahum comes along, 100 years later, the city had overstayed and has continued on its cruelty and all this, and it's time now for God's destruction to come. This oracle that comes concerning Nineveh is given to, of course, Nahum, and it is now written in a book. So you have the word for book. Now, book is actually not a very good title, okay? Because in ancient times, people didn't use books. They used scrolls, a sefer. A scroll was the way that people write things. The book form is codex, and codex didn't come about until the AD period. So they use a scroll. Okay, a book form that we are familiar with, the codex, this didn't exist until much later in time. So in a book form, you can see the way of writing a book is so different because in a book, you have pages, individual pages. You make an error, you can tear off that one page. In a scroll, when you write, that's it. You cannot make a mistake because it's very different. So the scroll of the vision of Nahum. So Nahum was given this you can say an expensive view of what will happen to this city, spread over 3 chapters, what God will do and all this. So this is the message that comes to one particular man, whether he lived opposite the capital city and watched the city across the river, or maybe this guy was someone back home in Judah. He received a vision of what God will do, and the book is a record, a faithful record of that vision. So as you say, there are 5 blocks. So we look at the first block. In the first block, I think Reverend Dickie Wong has already preached on this. So it is basically about God's theophany, God's appearance. Whenever God appears, God comes with power, and there's often this association with smoke and fire, lightning and thunder, a powerful picture of God's appearance. And it is in 8 verses, and you can see that these 8 verses is written in the form of a poem, an acrostic poem. What it means is someone who wrote it from verse 2 to verse 8, writing these verses, use what we call the Hebrew alphabets at the beginning of the verses. And it's a partial acrostic. That means it only lasts 10 letters, 10 alphabets, from Aleph, which is the first, to Yod, which is the 10th, using 10 letters. So Aleph, Gimel, Daleth, He, Waw, Zai, Hek, Tek, Yod. So 10 letters, and you begin your writing. Now, why do people want to write a poem this way? It is a very structured poem because you use the alphabets to help you to speak, and you force yourself to write a poem following the pattern that you find in this. And when people use an acrostic like this, sometimes it's like saying, I want to tell you something about a topic from, we often use nowadays in English, from A to Z. I'm going to cover a topic from A to Z. Now, when you say I'm going to cover a topic from A to Z, it's almost like I want to cover everything. So it is like I'm giving you a very complete description of who God is. So it uses a half acrostic, half only the letters. And basically you find two descriptions of God, which balances each other. And that will help you to see who is this God. On one side, you find that Nahum describes God as a jealous and an avenging God. Very often people focus on this part and they see a very wrathful God. See, your Old Testament God is so wrathful, so angry, always taking vengeance upon people. The Lord takes vengeance on his adversaries, keeps wrath for his enemies. Well, that's one part of God. Okay, he's one who is jealous for his people, jealous for his name, and he will overcome powers of evil. And so you see various imagery used about the sea as a chaotic force in the ancient times, the mountains and the hills sending obstacles, the earth and the world. Using all this imagery, almost like symbolizing obstacles in God's path, God will overcome them. And then when God appears, you can see he will dry up the river, even Lebanon will fade, mountains will quake, and the hills will melt. A lot of imagery taken from the Exodus event. When God appeared on Mount Sinai, you find the same type of theophany. There was thunder, there was earthquake, there was lightning and fire, and the people cower in fear. And Exodus is a paradigm of deliverance in the Old Testament. Whenever God wanted to show how God would deliver his people, people all remember the story of the Exodus. God came and set us free. And so by starting off with this imagery of God as a jealous and avenging God, is reminding the hearers no one can stand against God, not even Nineveh. Nineveh, you will say, is the strongest power at this time in the 7th century. Even Nineveh cannot stand against this God. If God can overcome all these mythological and ancient symbols of power and obstacles, you think Nineveh can stand before God? So that's one side. We see the avenging part of God, but yet on the other side, you also see that God is good. You have the Lord who is slow to anger and of great might. You also see God as in verse 7, the Lord is good. Tov, okay, and he's a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knows those who take refuge in him. So you see a more positive side on here. So if this is like a negative side of God, we talks about his power, his vengeance, his jealousy. Here you see the positive side of God, a God who is Tov, a God who is like a stronghold, a God who is a refuge for people who hide in him, and God can even use the flood waters as an instrument to destroy the enemy. So God can use anything as an instrument. Okay, in the hands of God, God can even use locusts to come, can use even fire, can use even water, can use even anything. So we see two sides of the nature of God. Who is this God that we're talking about? Well, Nahum starts off first. We have truly a God who is holiness on one side, love on the other side. And these two must be held together in a balance, because these two are both sides of God's nature. Very often people only see one side and focus, and so they argue that, see, the Old Testament God is such a angry, wrathful God. But they forget that God is also a God of love. Both sides, there are two sides to God's nature, and we must hold that in a balance. After beginning with the picture of God, then you can see a long section beginning of with verse 9, chapter 1, all the way into chapter 2, verse 2. And you will see again two sides of it. One is the negative part and one is the positive part. They are like a mirror image. And this is something we learn in the Old Testament. Whenever God pronounced judgment upon the enemies, negative for them, but good news for God's people, because it's always a converse. If this is bad news for the enemies, it will be good news for God's people. If God were to preach judgment on God's people, then it becomes good news on the enemies. The enemies will laugh at us. So it's a mirror image. You see two sides of it. So in this section, we see now, if asked a question, why do you plot against the Lord? Okay. Who is this that's plotting against God? Okay, because God will make an end to any plot by the enemy. And if you read on, by the time you come to verse 11, you can see, did one not come up from you who plotted evil against the Lord and counseled villainy? In English, the you, unfortunately, does not give us any clue in terms of gender and number, because our English you today is actually very ambiguous. Because a you have four ways to understand: masculine singular, feminine singular, masculine plural, feminine plural. So when you use the word you have actually qualified. You means what? Which one? You as masculine singular or feminine singular or plural or feminine plural or masculine plural. In the old days, we have the Old English. In the King James Bible, we use the word ye. Ye is used to refer to the plural. So at least we know when you use a ye is plural. So only we have to find out whether it is a plural term. So then only it's either masculine or feminine. And then in the King James, then when you use the word you, it will have to be singular compared with the ye, and then we only just have to find out whether it is a masculine and a singular and a feminine. So we have so-called make things much easier in the King James language when you use a ye. But today we throw away the word yes, subsume everything under a you. So what does it mean here? Very often when we read, we don't realize the one not come out from you, we assume it's a he. No, it is a feminine singular. So feminine singular means what? It means the capital city, because capital cities and the nations are feminine. Nations, capital cities, rivers are often feminine, because there's understood like mothers of civilization. They're like a mother, a city like a mother, and the children, the citizens of the city are like her children. So from this, you can see the one not come out from you, that means talking about the city, who plot evil. Now, unfortunately, our English sometimes translate this Hebrew word and subsume it under evil. But Belial is more than just evil. It's a word that's also used in the book of Judges at the end part in the appendix. Remember in the appendix, there was a story about Levite and the concubine. And you remember they stopped by and stay in the house of an old man. And then at night, some people of the village came and knocked on the door of the old man and tell the old man, we want you to send out this Levite. We want to know him. And the people who came knocking on the door are described with this Hebrew word. Some men of Belial came and knocked on the door. So what is Belial? Belia is actually a word which means worthless. People with no standing in society, people who are, uh, spending their time plotting evil, doing evil, they are like a menace and a harm to society. That's the meaning of the word belia. So it has a more meaning of worthless, and therefore idea of wickedness. We often just translate as evil, but it's more than that. Did one not come up from you as Nineveh who plot Belial? That means you are plotting things against God, but these plots are all worthless. They will not stand before God. You see, again, we lost that meaning. They are not evil plots, they are worthless plots. You can plan, but God will overthrow all these plots because they cannot stand against God. So, unfortunately, our translations, our modern translations in English, often don't capture the essence of it. So what is this? What Nahum is trying to remind the people is this: Assyria can plan and do all these other things, nothing will stand before God. Okay, and so in 12:13, you can see how God now turns to the people of Judah, and thus says the Lord, for such be a messenger formula, though they, the Assyrians, be strong and many, they will be cut off and pass by. And though I, God, has afflicted you, you people of Judah, I will afflict you no more. And now I will break his yoke, the Assyrian yoke, off you, and I will burst the bonds asunder. And the Lord has given a commandment about you. No more shall the name be perpetuated. It means Assyria, you people won't remember you anymore. From the house of your gods, I will cut off, and the graven image and the molten image, and I will make your grave for you a vow. So God assures Judah, Nineveh will come to an end, and you will no longer suffer those afflictions for those 200 years that Assyria was always oppressing this part of the nation. And then goes on with the bad news for Nineveh, which parallels the good news. Two verses standing side by side in juxtaposition. One is negative and one is positive. So if you are the Ninevites and you hear verse 14, it is negative. Okay, you will end no more. But then, if you are Judah, you will hear the goodness. Behold, on the mountains, the feet of him who brings good tidings, who proclaim peace. Imagine a herald. A herald climbs up on a high mountain and then shout this good news to the people of Judah. And then our enemy is gone. God has destroyed Nineveh and Assyria. And then now, Judah, you can keep your feast, you can fulfill the vows. Never again shall the wicked come against you, and he is utterly cut off. So the people of Judah will rejoice at the good news when Nineveh will be destroyed. Again, you find as you continue on, a negative and a positive word placed side by side in juxtaposition in the next section. And then the shatterer has come against you, talking about Nineveh. Someone will come and shatter your gates. You can mend the ramparts, you can wash the road, you can gird the loins, and you can collect a strength, but your city will be shattered. It's a judgment oracle. But for Judah, the Lord is going to restore the majesty of Jacob as the majesty of Israel. And all the plunderers have stripped them and ruined them. So again, as the people listen, good news for God's people, bad news for the enemy. And the rest of chapter 2 is basically about a description of the defeat of Nineveh. Okay, so you can see it's like if the earlier verses in chapter 1 was talking in a more general sense of the enemy coming and breaking and destroying Nineveh, here in these verses you can see almost now the battle is coming into the city itself. You can find descriptions of what's going to happen to the city. The shield of his mighty man is red, covered with blood. His soldiers are clothed in scarlet. The chariots flash like flame, mustered in array. The chargers prance about. The chariots rage in the streets. They rush to and fro through the squares. They gleam like torches. They dart like lightning. The officers are summoned. They stumble as they go. They hasten to the war. The mantelet is set up. The river gates are open. The palace is dismayed. It's almost like, someone says, almost like a eyewitness description of what happened when the battle goes into the city. When the city is breached, when the walls of a city are broken and the city is breached, you find the enemy troops pour in, and you can sense the panic there. The officers are summoned, but they stumble as they go. They run here, run there. Then the river gates are open. Remember, Nineveh was built on the bank of the river Tigris, and there were gates leading to the river. But the river gates are open, and the enemy is pouring in. And the people in the palace are, you can see, in dismay. His mistress is stripped, and she's carried off. Her maidens lamenting, moaning like doves, and beating her breast. So you can see the defenses of the city slowly crumbling. And God is using the armies of the nations, the combined force of the Medes and the Babylonians, attacking from the eastern side and chipping away at Nineveh. So God used them as his instrument, and they push. And then finally in verse 8, Nineveh is mentioned by name. Nineveh is like a pool whose waters run away. You know, when you have a pool of water, if you were to open a hole and you drain out the water will soon drain out. And it's a picture of Nineveh, its strength is slowly being drained away. Soldiers are running. Nobody wants to man the walls. And they cry out, hot, hot, they cry, but no one turns back. No, when the army began to desert, that's the worst part in the fighting. The army deserts because they lay down their arms, they drop all the weapons, and they began to desert because they don't want to fight anymore. And then the enemy comes and plunder the silver, plunder the gold, and there's no end of treasure or wealth of every precious thing. Desolation, desolation and ruin. Hearts faint, knees tremble. Anguish is on all the loins. All faces grow pale as the people see the enemy marching. It's actually, you can see it's written with such short verses, very catchy. It's not lyrical with long poetry. It almost looks like an eyewitness account, standing there watching the enemy overrunning the city, and then it's like you are lost for breath and you are just spurting out short phrases, and you can it's captured in these verses. 11 and 12, we see now the description of Nineveh. Assyria has always been symbolized by the lion. My daughter just went to British Museum yesterday and sent me this picture. And this is one of the winged lions they used to adorn the door of the palace of Ashurbanipal. Okay. And so a lion, because of this ferocity, fierceness, okay, they were symbolized by this. And the kings of Syria hunt as sport lions. They hunt lions for sport. If you walk into British Museum, after this lion, there is this panel on the walls which they try to recreate what the palace looked like. When you are a diplomat and you walk right through and enter into the palace, you will be bombarded with propaganda, Assyrian propaganda. The Assyrians will remind you who are you dealing with. You're dealing with Assyrian kings who hunt lions for sport. You hunt lions for sport. So in one of the panels, I took a lot of pictures when I was in there years ago. You see the Assyrian king riding his chariot with a spear, hunting lions. And that was how ferocious the Assyrian kings were. Here you can see Nineveh is described no longer like a lair of lions. Okay. Where is the lion's den? The cave of the young lions, where the lion brought his prey, where his cubs were with none to disturb. The lion tore enough for his whelps and then strangled prey for his lioness. He filled his cage with prey and his lions with torn flesh. Assyria is pictured like a lion who brings back booty from all the countries he has conquered and to feed his young lions. But now is no longer a lair of lions. Its power has been broken, and her power over other nations is broken because she is in turn now being destroyed, ransacked. And God makes a promise in verse 13. Behold, Hine. And God three times you find God comes into the picture personally. And three times you find the word I used. I am against you, says the Lord of hosts. I will burn your shadows in smoke, and the sword will devour your young lions. I will cut off your prey from the earth, and the voice of your messengers shall no more be heard. God personally intervenes and then makes this solemn promise. Nineveh, I will utterly destroy you. And who is this God that comes? Now we see a picture. In English, we often translate as Lord of Hosts. In Hebrew, Yahweh Sevaoth. Sevaoth means armies or hosts. Not just physical armies, but perhaps the heavenly hosts, the heavenly army. God has a heavenly army. And one time, and he showed that the city is surrounded by this huge heavenly army of fiery chariots. That is who God is. God is the commander, the Lord of hosts, the commander of all the heavenly armies. So God himself says, I will intervene and I will come and I will make sure Assyria will be totally destroyed. So God promised he will come in and he will make sure there will be an end. And so in chapter 3, the last chapter, the first 3 verses is what we call a woe oracle. Very interesting. I like woe oracles. It always begins with this Hebrew word hoi. Hoi to the bloody city, all fools of lies and booty, no end to the plunder. Hoi is often translated in different ways in our English translations. Woe, sometimes you find it translated as to me doesn't sound threatening. Sounds like sometimes someone it's like someone is in pain, but it's a type of enjoyable pain. Or sometimes people say alas. Or maybe some English translation, oh, to the bloody city. I find R and O that's not powerful enough. Because when you use the word hoi, it is like in Malay, maybe today in English, in Malay, we will use the word alamak. Alamak to that, to that bloody city. Or maybe we say in Chinese, say la, to the bloody city, die la, That's what it means. That's what hoi is. Is whoa. Okay, gonna, or maybe we put in modern language, yeah, gonna. Okay, that's it. That's what woe is. And Jesus used the hoi also in Matthew to scold the Pharisees and the scribes. Woe to you Pharisees. You are like whitewashed men. You are like whitewashed tombs full of dead man bones inside. Woe to you Pharisees. Imagine when Jesus said, he will probably use the same equivalent in Aramaic, hoi to you. When you hear the word hoi, I think your hair on the back of your neck must stand up, because people are like passing judgment upon you. So woe to the bloody city full of lies. Why? Because Nineveh is a city full of violence, deceit, and greed. Greed, because the Ninevites literally believe that their goddess of war, which is Ishtar, has actually told them to go and conquer the rest of the world. Ishtar is their goddess, and she is a goddess of war and the goddess of love. Very interesting. Both the same god, war and love. And maybe some people say, yeah, in love also sometimes you have a lot of war. And she's the same god. And Ishtar actually tells the nation of Ashur, that is the name of Assyria, Ashur, that they are supposed to go out and conquer. And so we have these so-called oracles often given to the kings, and Ishtar commands them, go out and conquer. So they want to expand their land. Greed, and they use lies as well sometimes to deceive people, and they use violence to conquer. And here's the war oracle, and you see how they use their power. You can see the climatic battle. Well, the bloody city will be overrun because we hear the crack of the whip, the rumble of the wheel, galloping horses, bounding chariots, horsemen charging, flashing sword and glittering spear, hosts of slain, heaps of corpses, dead bodies without end, and they stumble over all the bodies. You can see almost a picture of the final fight, and people will then look at it and say, well, she deserved a punishment because she did that to others. You remember in the time of Hezekiah, in the 8th century, the Assyrians came after conquering the northern kingdom, and they came to Jerusalem. They have taken over all the cities of Judah. In fact, Sennacherib make a boast. I took 46 cities in Judah, and the only city left was Jerusalem, which he says, I caged up Hezekiah like a bird in a cage. Then the king was so confident, he doesn't even come to Jerusalem. He sends his propaganda officer, Rabshakeh. You can read that in Isaiah 36 and the parallel account in Kings. And Rabshakeh comes and he stands at the wall and he tells the people at the wall, my master has conquered all these nations. See, all these kings and all their gods have been subsumed by my master. My master is truly the king of the whole world. And so when now the king of the world is herself being overrun, and you can see how now everybody is glad they are going to suffer. And whatever they do will not help them. So the final part is verse 4 to 19, a long oracle of judgment. And you can see, and the reason is often given. Why does God seem so focused on bringing judgment upon Nineveh? Well, you see in verse 4 to 7, the reason given. So let me read to you 4 to 7. And all for the countless harlotries of the harlot, graceful and of deadly charms, who betray nations with her harlotries and peoples with her charms. Behold, I am against you, said the Lord of hosts, and I will lift up your skirts over your face, and I'll let the nations look on at your nakedness, and the kingdoms on your shame. I will throw filth at you and treat you with contempt. I'll make you a gazing stock, and all who look on you will shrink from you and say, wasted is Nineveh. Who will bemoan her? When shall I come and seek comforters for her? The reason is given. She had enticed the other nations with her debauchery. She swallowed them up. She's like a harlot who used lies and deceit and brings a young man into her bosom. She has betrayed nations with the same harlotry. Using the image of like a prostitute, she prostituted herself and caused other nations to fall. Now God will disgrace her before others. And when she falls, she will have no one to help her. No one? Yes, no one. She will have no comforters. And verse 8 to 9, you can see there will be no one to help her, because 8 to 9 is a taunt song. A taunt song is a type of genre where the prophets mock the recipient and taunt. When you taunt, like sometimes kids in school, when you see our schoolmate do something, and then we taunt and laugh. Hey, we taunt the person. Here is like a taunt song, and using the image of the ransack of Thebes, because they had ransacked Thebes in 663 BC. Remember, Thebes was the capital of Egypt. Egypt was the other counter point of power on the west side. If Assyria was the major power on the east side, Egypt represents the counterpoint. But Thebes herself fell. And so when she fell, she was ransacked and defeated by Ashurbanipal. And although Thebes has allies and vassal states, and you can see it's mentioned there, she had Ethiopia, she had the rest of Egypt, Lower Egypt, she had Put, which is often translated as perhaps Sudan or whatever, and then you have the Libyans. They had all this to help, but none could help her. None could help Thebes survive the ransack. Using that imagery, the taunt song is, you think you're better than Thebes? Nineveh, you think you will survive? Just as Thebes fell, so will you. If you did, so it's a question of the law of retribution. You did that to Thebes, now it will be done back to you. You reap what you sow. The law of retribution was a law which the ancient people believed. You reap what you sow. You did that to Thebes, now it will be done to you. Okay, and then verse 10 to 13, you will see a description of what will happen to the mighty empire of Assyria. Yet she was carried away, she referring back to Thebes, carried away by the Assyrians. She went into captivity. Her little ones were dashed. They took the prisoners, the Egyptian people as prisoners, shaved their heads, killed the little babies, dashed in the streets at the head of every street. Her honored men, lords were cast, and all her great men were bound in chains. Then verse 11 swings back to Assyria. Now you also will be drunken. Not you'll be like what you did to others, drunk, because you'll be hit and like a drunken boxer, hit on all sides by your opponent, and you cannot even raise up your hands to defend yourself. You will be drunken, you'll be dazed, you will seek a refuge from the enemy, and all your fortresses are like the fig tree with the first ripe figs. You know, when you see a fig tree with ripe figs, you shake the tree. You shake the tree so that the figs will drop. Maybe like what we do with durian trees. We shake the durian tree so that the durian will drop. And if shaken, they will fall. But where will they fall? The fruit will fall into the mouth of the eater. You can't, there's no way to run. That means it's saying there's no way out. No way out for you, Assyria. You will fall into the hands of the eater. Behold, your troops are like women. You know, your mighty soldiers will all be like women in battle. And the gates of your land are wide open to your foes, and fire has burned down your walls. So a picture of what will happen to Assyria. What you did to others, you sent them to exile, you took them captives, they were like you drunk, they were like refugees running away, strengthened to weakness, become like women in battle. All this will happen to you as well. And the final part, 14 to 17, you can see again, any exaltation, anything that you try to do to help yourself is doomed. So verse 14 to 17, let me read. Draw water for the siege. That means you can build all your reservoirs of water, prepare yourself for a long siege, because people in ancient times used siege, surround the city, starve the city, force the city to capitulate. You can draw water for the siege. You can strengthen your forts. You can go to the clay and tread the mortar and make all these bricks and all this. Fire will devour you. The sword will cut you off, and it will devour you like the locust. So nothing you do will help you, because fire and sword will come and you'll break down your walls. And then using an image of locusts. Ancient people are very familiar with locusts, because when the locust comes, they are a plague of locusts, and they will come and eat up everything in their wake. And it says here, you can multiply yourself like the locust, multiply like the grasshopper. You increase your merchants more than the stars of the heavens, because they depend on trade and they send all their merchants all over the place, and that's why Assyria grows strong and powerful. But then he says, the locust spread its wings and they fly. When the locust starts bearing wings, they learn to fly. And it says, your princes are like grasshoppers. Your scribes are like the clouds of locusts, settling on the fences in a day of cold. When the sun rises, they fly away. But they fly away where? No one knows. And it's a picture that one day your forces will be chicken. They will turn chicken and like these grasshoppers, and they'll fly away and they cannot be found. So it's like a taunt to Assyria. You think your army was so great. I mean, your army was very great in the past, but now your armies will all run away. And the final word to the king of Assyria. Your shepherds, your leaders are asleep, O king Assyria. Your noblemen are in slumber. Your people are scattered on the mountains. And telling them that, you thought that your army is strong and able, you're led by able officers. Everybody is asleep on a job. And when the enemy comes, your troops will run over the hills. And there's no one to regather, no one to gather them back. And then there's no assuaging your hurt, and your wound is grievous. And finally, it's perhaps a way to remind us that you will eventually suffer a mortal blow and will die. See, your wound is grievous. And then all those who hear this good news, Assyria has fallen, Assyria has fallen, they will rejoice. Nobody will mourn for you, because it's like the tyrant has fallen and everybody rejoices. Good news. All who hear the news of you clap their hands over you, for upon whom has not come your unceasing evil. So as we sum up this message, you can see, why single Assyria? Well, eventually other nations were also brought in. So you find Habakkuk talking about the next enemy, there's Babylon. And you find the book of Daniel talks about the next enemy, the little horn that will come and they will make war on the saints. But Assyria is picked here because in the 7th to the 6th century, she was the epitome of power. And she was no ordinary city. And it's still like a symbol of evil, a symbol of everything that oppresses and thwarts God's purposes. And you can see how Assyria was well known. They actually have a very interesting practice. When they defeat you, they have this practice of importation and deportation. We're not talking about trade, import and no. Importation and deportation means what? First, they will deport you. They will take your best people and exile them, send them back to Assyria and make use of all your best brains. Then in importation, they will import foreigners into your midst. So you can imagine, okay, Israel fell to the Assyrians. Although Judah survived for the time being. What do the Assyrians do? Very smart. To make sure that you don't rebel against them, they import foreigners into your midst. And by importing, they dilute your population. And then they deport your best brains, the royal court, officials, your generals, your craftsmen, your artisans, your priests. They deport them back home and make use of them. A very terrible twin policy that really did its job, because by doing this, you erase, because when I deport all your best brains, then you do not have leaders to rebel. So I actually remove any threat of rebellion, because what's left behind are not the smart people. See, they put all the common people, and then they dilute your population. They import the foreigners, make them live with you, and within a few hundred years, you find that you will intermarry with these foreigners. And when you intermarry with these foreigners, you're no longer pure. And that's why out came out Samaritans, half Jews, product of intermarriage between the survivors of the northern kingdom and foreigners. And that's why the Jews down south don't like them. So their cruelty, their oppression was well known. They conquer you, they'll make you into a vassal state. You pay tribute, and very often heavy tribute. We can read in the Old Testament, when the king loses a battle, they have to go back home and then salvage whatever money and gold and silver and oil, olive oil and grain, and they will send heavy tribute. At one time, they lost. The guy even had to go into the temple and strip the golden shields from the temple in Jerusalem to pay heavy tribute. So they really oppressed, subjugated. So their defeat was a sign that God is going to turn the table. Okay, a reversal of fortunes. They will pay the price and they will suffer instead. And so this was therefore something very important in the ancient world, because this is like the overthrow of an enemy that is so loathed and hated. And Nahum's oracle was probably used and reused in later times to remind the people, well, other countries will come like Assyria, they will conquer us, but don't worry, evil will not triumph forever. Just as God defeated Assyria, God will defeat this new enemy. So after Assyria came the Babylonians. After the Babylonians came the Persians. After the Persians came the Greeks. After the Greeks came the Romans. Nahum will continue to speak to the people. You trust God, God will make sure justice and righteousness will ultimately triumph over evil. If Assyria can fall, any other power will also fall. So that's a message. So today we find in the 12 minor prophets, Nahum is number 7 among the pre-exilic prophets. There are 9 pre-exilic prophets before the Babylonian exile. And then at the end of the other book, there are 3 post-exilic prophets: Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Okay. So Nahum is number 7 here. Nahum comes after Micah. Very interesting. So Micah precedes Nahum, and Nahum precedes Habakkuk. Now, they have obviously been arranged by the editors of the book. Because if you look at the 12 minor prophets, the 12 minor prophets are not arranged in a chronological order. Don't ever think that the 12 minor prophets are arranged in a chronological order. The only chronology is the 9 pre-exilic prophets precede the three post-exilic prophets. That's correct. But within the 9, you find that which start off first? Hosea starts off first, then followed by Joel, and then followed by Amos. So you find that Amos is supposed to be the first, but he doesn't start off the book of the minor prophets. So obviously there has been some form of arrangement in the book so that it doesn't really follow chronological order. Amos should be number 1, followed by Hosea. But they have been rearranged into this format. So we find therefore we have to ask the question, why is the book then arranged in such a way that you find Nahum now placed as number 7? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Well, you can see it is placed after Micah. Now, Micah, of course, was a prophet who speak in Judah, who prophesied in Judah, and talking about how God will indeed is angry with the people because they have sinned. But the ends, it's talking about judgment upon the people. Michael Moresheth scolded the people, especially in Jerusalem, that they have forgotten God. But at least it ends on a very upbeat note, a very positive note that God will do something great. Who is this God who pardons iniquity, who passes over transgression for the remnant of his inheritance? God will not retain his anger forever. He will delight in steadfast love. He will again have compassion. So he ends on a very good note. And he's quoting a lot from Exodus. But then, although it ends on a very positive note, you then find Nahum, which is totally negative. But the negative part is not on God's people. The negative part is on the enemy. A whole book entirely just on the enemy. And then after Nahum comes Habakkuk, and then Habakkuk is also negative, but it's on the next enemy to come, and that is the dreaded the Chaldeans, the Babylonians. So Nahum is in place here, almost like to show you there is a possibility of hope even for God's people if they repent, but there's no hope for the enemy Assyria. Assyria has run the course of its time. God has determined her time is up. It's like an hour clock, and in the hour clock, time has run out. All the sand has dropped down and there's nothing left. So your time has run out, and God will bring judgment. The whole book is about God bringing judgment upon the enemy who have been oppressing the people of God for so long. So let's draw some application lessons from a book like Nahum. Surely because we ask ourselves, what can we learn from a book like Nahum? Okay, because Nahum is a book that is singularly focused on the enemy. There's actually nothing about God's people in that sense, except that he always says God's people will rejoice as well. So there's no condemnation on God's people. The entire condemnation is on the enemy. And then when people read the book of Nahum, especially 100 years ago, when scholars read the book of Nahum, they got put off by it because they say, how can you have a prophet who only condemns the enemy but doesn't condemn God's people? Because God's people are also can also be sinners, can also sin against God and break God's covenant. And you can see the type of language used, so angry, so wrathful. That's why many of them got put off by the book of Nahum. Some of the scholars say, this book, I think, is out of place. And even some people accuse the book of Nahum is a false prophet. He cannot be preaching the truth, because how can you don't scold your own people? Well, what can we say about that? Well, let me just sum it up in these few ways. One, to focus on one's enemy is not entirely wrong, especially if that enemy had been such terrible enemy like Assyria. Because sometimes you don't understand. We in Malaysia, we are really blessed. We live in a country which has hardly seen wars, except for World War II when the Japanese invaded our country. We've not seen wars and we've not been subjugated by our enemies. And if you think the Japanese was bad, well, wait till you read up the stories of what Assyria did to the people. So if an enemy can be so terrible, a terrible enemy, oppresses you for more than 100 over years. In fact, at the height of its power, around the 7th, 8th century down to the 6th century, for almost 200 years, this big brother was always on the scene, always demanding tribute, always waging war and all this. To focus on it and say what God will do is not entirely wrong, because God definitely has something to speak on such enemies. When you turn to the prophets, you find the major prophets, the three major prophets of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, all also have OANs in their preaching. Remember, oracles against the nation. They also have in their preaching oracles against these nations that surrounded Israel. Isaiah also has a whole list. Jeremiah also has a whole list. Ezekiel has a whole list. Even Amos chapter 1 and 2. For 3 transgressions and for 4, God says, I will not revoke the punishment. And then it starts off with Damascus and swing round Edom, Moab, Tyre, Phoenicia, Philistines, and all this. And so all of them also single out foreign nations in their preaching. It's not just against God's people, but they also single out the foreign nations, because God is the Lord of all nations. If foreign nations cross their boundary, overstep their boundaries, God also has something to say, and God will do something. So it reminds us that first, God is the Lord of history, and God is also the Lord of hosts. He fights on behalf of his people. In the Old Testament, we call this image the divine warrior. God is the divine warrior who fights on behalf of his people. The supreme example, of course, we see that is in the Exodus event. In the Exodus event, God was the divine warrior who fought on Israel's behalf. And so we see the divine warrior challenging the gods of Pharaoh of Egypt, okay, against Pharaoh, who is also considered a god, and against all the so-called gods of Egypt and the powers and all this. And God challenges all these things. So God is a divine warrior, and he will fight for his people in the past, in the present, and in the future. So just as God fought and delivered his people from Assyria, God do fight on our behalf too. And to our children and their future, God will continue to also fight on their behalf, because God is the Lord of history. God, nothing happens in history without God knowing, and nothing happens in history without God allowing, because God rules over all the nations. Nations that don't understand God, that do not acknowledge God, that overstep their boundaries, well, God will then say, time's up, and then God will take action. So to focus on one's enemy, especially like an enemy like Assyria, is not wrong. Okay? It is to remind us that there is the other side, the enemy. An enemy that oppresses God's people, an enemy that stands against God. And we don't have to worry, because God is on our side. If God is not on our side, then we really have no hope in the future, because God is with us. And this is not what we call Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude is a German word which means laughing at the downfall of your enemies. You know, that sometimes we use this word when we see our enemy fall. We laugh. No, it's not laughing joy like that. Okay, because in war it's terrible. There was a movie that was made recently. About the destroyer, the destroyer ships in the World War II, starring Tom Hanks as captain of this destroyer. It's actually a very good movie, and the captain is actually a very good Christian, a very fine Christian, very pious, and he prays, and then it shows him in charge of this as director to UK in the wartime. and the Germans were sending their U-boats and submarines to sink this merchant ships. And so in that movie, you see there was a battle between the destroyer and the submarines, and eventually they managed to sink the submarine. They managed to sink the submarine, and the captain actually turned around and said, we shouldn't be rejoicing and laughing at that. Why? Because how many people actually died, sunk? I mean, they die in the submarine because they couldn't escape as the submarine sunk into the ground. And you die of watery death. It's terrible to die of watery death. Eventually dying of the lack of oxygen. And he doesn't see them as enemies. Tom Hanks, the captain, sees them as people. And there's no joy over the death of the enemy because it's human life that is at stake. So when Nahum pronounced judgment and all these things, it's not Schadenfreude where we now laugh at them and say, it's not that. It's rather, if we ever rejoice, it is actually rejoicing that we have a God who is powerful and a God who is sovereign. We don't have a God that is weak. We don't have a God that is unable. Because if we have a God that is weak and unable, then this God cannot save us. And this God is not worth believing in and following. But we don't have a weak God. We have a God who is powerful, a God who is sovereign. And you notice he can intervene. To intervene into human history means he can come and break into human history. I always see when God comes into human history, he breaks into our time and space. God breaks into our time and space because God lives in eternity. But he comes into our human time and space and intervenes, put his hand in, or comes in the presence of the angel of the Lord, and he comes as a commander of the Lord of hosts, and he comes into our time and space and lead us, guide us, protect us, and defeat his enemies, and eventually setting his people free. So that imagery of the Exodus is a very powerful reminder. God comes into our human time and space. God is not a distant God, so far away. After making the world, like a watchmaker, just let the watch run by itself. I don't care about you guys. You guys take care of yourself. No, God is not. God is not that type of dazed God, a God who just make the world and then no longer concerned. No, God comes in a human time and space. He intervenes. He personally comes in and makes sure, Assyria, your time is up. I am against you. I will burn your chariots in smoke. I will cut off your prey. So he comes and intervenes. And it's a reminder to us that today, God still break into our time and space. I think in Malaysia, we must sense how God comes and break into our time and space. God is not a God who is a God of a museum. In the past, he was alive, but not today. Some people think the Bible is a book that belongs to a museum. It talks about God maybe then, but now God doesn't seem to work. No, he still inbreak into our time, our space. God can do something even in Malaysia. And I think the last election, God did something to show that there's a possibility that even the world longest governing authorities, the government, the BN government, after over 1 year, finally fell. It can be overthrown. So now we no longer have the record of the longest. So God can break into time and space, and God can still set people free. And Assyria is just a symbol of evil, a pagan, tyrannical metropolis exalting itself against God, following after their goddess Ishtar and thinking that we can now subjugate the whole world under her feet. And it's just like any other of those ancient cities in the past. Babylon, Edom, Rome, they all also stood up against God and tried to exalt themselves and try to also put themselves above God. Or personalities like Nebuchadnezzar. So when you read Daniel, you can see how Nebuchadnezzar was given that dream. Yeah, you're like a big tree, a giant tree with its leaves and branches spreading out the whole world. Everybody comes under your shade. But the watchers come and decided your time is up. and you'll be cut down and left with only a stump. See, there will be proud people like Nebuchadnezzar all through the centuries, and they will speak out against God and exhort them against God. Or maybe the little horn that you find in Daniel 7 to 12, the little horn that exalts itself and make all these boasts. And we know it was a reference to that Greek Seleucus fellow, Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth. In fact, he was so proud that he actually called himself God manifest on earth. And that's what it means, Epiphanes, God manifest on earth. He was a little horn that makes all the boasts. Or Nero, who most people think is the focus of the book of Revelation, the one that also seeks the Antichrist who's supposed to come. So Assyria and all this is just like all these other cities and personalities, something that is a symbol that stands up against God. And by the time we come to New Testament times, Babylon becomes the symbol. Edom also becomes a symbol in many parts of the book as well. Isaiah 63, the whole book of Obadiah. And then Rome also becomes a symbol of power against God. So the author in Hebrew says, we at Babylon salute you, send greeting to you. And Babylon was a cryptic term used to hide the fact that these are believers in Rome. So Rome also became like a city that sought to challenge God. And so in a sense, therefore, in application, we can ask ourselves, Nahum is a book which has actually a lot to teach us. It's a reminder to us, be careful, because we, the faithful, can also sometimes end up reaping what we sow. Because we can sometimes in turn become also a Nineveh. We also can sometimes begin to oppress others, lord over others, dominate over others, subjugate others. You can be like a Pharaoh who did not let God's people go. Moses says, let my people go. And Pharaoh said, no, I'm not going to let you go. Or are we like a Nebuchadnezzar? I built all this with my own hands. And you want to subjugate everybody under your power. If we are not careful, the same words that Nahum used on Nineveh might be used on us if we are not careful. It's a reminder that we too will reap judgment if we ever turn out to be a Nineveh. And sometimes, I think in the past, the church, the institutional church, has sometimes went overboard, and sometimes we too end up like a Nineveh. We oppress, and you can see how many wars that have been fought over religion. The Protestant versus Catholic wars in Ireland and all sorts of things. The church killing the Anabaptists, and sometimes in the name of religion, we too can end up oppressing other people. So in conclusion, one may say Nahum, well, most will bypass Nahum. I'm thankful that EFCPJ is preaching through the book, because really I don't find many other churches preaching through a book like Nahum. Neither do people do even Bible studies on Nahum, because it will tend to ignore and bypass. What can I learn from Nahum? It's only solely focused on Nineveh. It's only just discussion about Nineveh. Or some people say the book has nothing ethical to teach us, because it's about vengeance and a wrathful God. Or maybe nothing theological to say. What can we learn about destruction of our enemy? I think we truly misunderstand the book. If we think the book is only about human vengeance and hatred, then I think we have truly misunderstood the book. No, the book is not about human vengeance and hatred. The book is actually all about God. That's why it starts off with those verses to remind you first, who is this God we are talking about? And we see the two sides of God's nature. There are two sides. He is a holy God. That's why the holy God demands justice. But yet he's also the good, loving God, a stronghold for people, a refuge for those who need to run. And the book is also about what God will do. Now notice, it is not what we do. I think The whole thing why we get so misunderstood about Nahum is we think this is a book telling us what to do. No, it's not. It is about divine action, not human action. There's nothing in the book that tells us, therefore go and take up arms and then go and ransack Nineveh. God will use his instruments, his armies of the nations and do this. Vengeance is best left in God's hands. We are not told, take vengeance upon Nineveh because he did all this against you. No, we are told, trust God. God knows what he's doing and God knows what he will do. You don't have to worry and fret over what you think you must do. No, just leave the vengeance to God. You pray, we can pray about it, we can remind God about it, remind God about what Assyria did and all this, but in the end, we leave everything back to God. Trust God and leave. So the book is about evil. It's about evil that rises to challenge God. You see? And it's a reminder that did not one come out from you who plot Belial against the Lord and counsel all this villainy, and then God reminds you, evil will be done away by God. God will remove this evil. And so in the last word, you will see there is no more assuaging your hurt, your wound is grievous, it's a mortal blow, and then everybody will rejoice and clap their hands over you because of your unceasing evil. So the book is about evil that arises, and in every age there will be evil that will come out. In any age, there will be a Nebuchadnezzar, there will be a Nero, there will be a little horn, there will be a little antichrist. In every age, evil arise and will always challenge God. But the good news is God will stretch out his hands and do away. Bad news for the enemy, entirely good news, the mirror image. Good news for God's people. If God pronounced judgment upon the enemy, this is truly good news for us. So that we can truly rejoice. God is good all the time. Okay, let me pass it back to Yu Yong.
All right, thank you, Rabbi, for the session. All right, just want to yeah, now is the time for question and answers. At this time, I think we have 3 questions. Let me read. Do know that if you have any questions that you want to ask, you may write it down in the chat or you may access it via the Slido link. Also, if you want the notes, I've already given the link to the Google Forms. It will lead you to a short feedback form where you will be asked to enter your email address. We will send the notes out to your email either today or tomorrow or Tuesday. So, let's the questions. How did the Jews respond to the message by Nahum? Do we know anything about their response?
Okay, first question. When you use the word Jews, what are you thinking? Are you thinking about modern day people or are you thinking about the people God back then in Nahum's time? If it's back then in Nahum's time, there are no Jews yet. There are only Israelites and Judahites. So exactly what is this question asking? Is it a modern day response or is it the time of Nahum?
I think it's probably referring to the time of Nahum.
So how did the Judahites respond to the message? Because by that time, there's no more northern kingdom of Israel, so no more Israelites in a sense, only the southern kingdom of the Judahites. How did they respond? I think they of course will have responded very well. They will have clapped their hands when the news finally filtered down in 612 BC. Nineveh fell. 3 more years later, Haran fell, and the whole empire was swallowed up. But the problem is it was swallowed up by another empire, that's Babylon, and they will soon suffer after Babylon. But for that moment, I can imagine the response. As I said, we have to read the Bible and understand what the Assyrians did to the northern kingdom. The northern kingdom, remember, was destroyed. The people were exiled. The 10 tribes were exiled, most of them, the cream of the population. And then in their place, foreign people were placed and they dilute the population and you end up with a new group of people called Samaritans. So we always have this interesting hypothesis. What happened to the 10 lost tribes? The 10 lost tribes? Judah, minus Judah and Benjamin, the 10 lost tribes are Reuben, Simeon, Issachar, Zebulun, and all these people were, most of them were exiled and placed in the different cities in Assyria. You can read that in the book of Kings. And you live over there, you begin to accommodate, you intermarry, and soon you lose your ethnicity and you disappear from the rest of history. Those who stay back in the northern kingdom but intermarry with the foreigners who had been imported in became known as the Samaritans. So if you can see what the Assyrians did to their northern kingdom, you will be angry. Is it? Our cousins all gone. Today, the Jews think that they can trace all the descendants of the 10 lost tribes, unless you do DNA tests, which is very hard. So imagine you're down south and you're looking up 722, our northern kingdom, our cousins were defeated, exiled, and then within 100 years, all gone, and now only left the Samaritans. Don't you get angry? And I think when finally news comes, God has destroyed the dreaded enemy, the enemy that you have been paying tribute over 100 years and all this, that is gone. I think you rejoice. He wasn't rejoicing in the sense that Schadenfreude, but rather rejoicing that God finally stretched out his hand and removed this evil from his place, and now we can breathe easier. So that will lead to the next question. In today's world, should we expect God's judgment to come upon those who are evil? I would say yes, but it is God's timing. God's timing and also God's response. Does God work all the time? Well, we have to say we can't force God to act the way we want God to act. God has his own timing and God has his own purpose. Sometimes God acts immediately and brings judgment. Sometimes maybe God doesn't bring judgment here and now, but maybe in the future. So we can only sit and look and discern God's hand. What is God doing? How we wish sometimes God will bring immediate judgment upon a nation that does all this. Like, for example, people who are going around killing others in the name of religion. Why doesn't God do something immediately? How we wish God will do that? Maybe God is doing, or maybe God is holding back until one day in the future, then the enemy will be removed. Or maybe God is saving it up for Judgment Day. We don't know. We are not God. We don't know how God acts. We don't know how God weighs his judgments and determines. As people, as mortals, we often wish God would do it like this. But it's often then our way, not God's way. So we can only pray, your kingdom come, your will be done. So what is God's will? Well, we don't know. We can try to discern. In the case of Nahum, he discerned God's will was the city will fall. God will judge this Ninevites terribly. Remember, God had given them an opportunity once. Jonah preached judgment. The people repented. And someone said, was it a genuine repentance? Why not? The king put on sackcloth. Even the animals also put on sackcloth and fasted, It means they were genuine. And so God, I think, allowed the Assyrian nation to survive another 100 more years. But 100 years later, the people now has overstepped the boundaries. They've been so cruel. They've been, enticing and bringing all these nations with their debauchery and all this deceit and lies on this. God finally says, enough is enough. God will do something. So we can expect God will do something, but when is God's timing? How? Also God's action. We may want something to happen like that, but God will decide how it will happen. Will God zap lightning from heaven and burn all these terrible fellows as well? Only God will know what he will do, you see. So sometimes God may bring, but maybe in ways which will be surprising, maybe in ways which may go beyond, beyond even our expectation. So we just leave it to God and we trust God that God will do. Okay, third question. What are the differences between the major and the minor prophets? Can you elaborate? Okay, this term major minor was a term given in the Middle Ages to describe three of the prophets compared with the 12. And the word came from the Latin, prophetes majores and prophetes minores. You can see it's Latin. And they use this term just to describe them in terms of length. Major, minor, unfortunately, they give us a wrong idea of importance. Major means more important, minor, less important. No, major and minor was in terms of length. So that Isaiah, 66 chapters, Jeremiah, 52 chapters, Ezekiel, 48 chapters. So they are called major prophets because of the length. All the minor prophets are called minor because the longest is only Hosea, 14 chapters, and the shortest is 1 chapter. So in terms of length, they are short. So therefore, this term came about, major, minor, because of length, not because of importance. Unfortunately, if you think it's importance, that's why we don't read the minor prophets. And then especially books like only one chapter, Obadiah. What's there to read about Obadiah? But remember, don't think of it as in terms of importance. They're just minor, major because of length. Okay, and you find that Daniel is not inside here because in the Jewish understanding of the Old Testament, Daniel was a book that is found in the third section of the writings. So Daniel is not counted as a prophet because Daniel is a book which is more than prophecy. It's a book about Daniel the wise man. So it's about the masculine, the wise. And Daniel is also a book that uses apocalyptic chapters 7 to 12 uses all this imagery of numbers, animal imageries, and all this. So it is a book which is a hybrid. It is not just purely prophetic, but moves beyond. So Daniel is not counted as a major prophet. In our Protestant Bibles, we move Daniel back into its position so that we have Isaiah, Jeremiah, then followed by Lamentations, which people think was written by Jeremiah, then Ezekiel, then Daniel, before we have the 12 minor prophets. So Daniel seems left out, unfortunately, in the counting by the Jews. But Daniel is placed in the third section under the writings, the Ketubim.
Okay. Thank you, Rabbi. I think that's it for the questions. Let me check the chat. Is there any more questions? All right. There's no other questions, and it's 12:45. Thank you so much for imparting your words of wisdom to us, Rabbi. So yeah, if once again, if you want to access the recording will be made available on our YouTube page at pgscyoutube.com. You can access it in 2 days time. And also the notes, if you want the notes, please fill out the feedback form which are given to you in the chat. We will send you the notes pretty soon. Yeah, so with that said, let's close in prayer. Father, we want to thank you, Lord, for the message for the book of Nahum. We want to thank you, Lord, that we are reminded, Lord, that you are sovereign, that, Lord, you will judge evil, and that, Lord, you are just. So, Father, we want to pray, Lord, that even in today's world, when we see regimes or people who oppress others, who seems like no one can stop them, who seems like when it seems like evil is thriving, we want to ask, Lord, that you remind us of the message of this book, Lord, that, Lord, you see everything, Lord, and one day you bring them to judgment. But Lord, help us also not to be cocky, not to be arrogant as well, not to become a Nineveh, not to oppress others. But Lord, help us to learn to love each other, Lord, and to treat each other well. So Father, we want to pray for Rabbi too, that, Lord, you will continue to bless him and his ministry. Busy few months for him ahead. Be with him as he does many of his sessions, and also as he begins to plan and also to rest for next year. We want to pray that you will sustain him, that your favor be with him wherever he goes. All this we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right.
Thank
you, everyone.
Reverend.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for the opportunity. Yeah.
Thank you, Reverend. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.